Welcome to Let's Talk Jets Radio.
Cheers. What's up, everybody? Let's Talk Jets Radio. Hope you guys are all doing well, enjoying your summer. Less than a week until veterans report to training camp, and I have a very, very special guest, the man single-handedly responsible for all of my torture as a Mets, Jets, Knicks, and Rangers fan, my number one wingman, known at tailgates as Mr. Sausage, my father, Harry Serkin. How you doing, man?
Great. How you doing?
Doing well. This is pretty cool, honestly. You know, I've had a chance to, talk with players over the years, but to actually get a chance to sit down with you and share all the stories that you've shared with me over the past 34 years, this is going to be pretty cool. So just starting, with your childhood, what ultimately led to you becoming a Mets and Jets fan growing up?
I can remember her really early on. I had to be 4 years old, 5 years old. And that's when we were living in the old neighborhood and growing up in the Bronx. Before the Mets, my dad would take me. He was a huge New York Giants baseball fan. He would take me to the Giants baseball games. But I also remember going to Yankee games and Brooklyn Dodger games. I clearly remember Duke Snider. I don't know why him over everybody else, but I remember calling out to Duke Snider so many times from the stands, like he was going to turn around and talk to me. But, as a 4 or 5 year old, that's what you do. But I clearly remember Willie Mays, who was my dad's favorite player. And he kind of brainwashed me in a baseball. And I loved it. That team, Mays, McCovey, Juan Marichal, the Alou brothers, Orlando Cepeda. I mean, that was an amazing team. And that's kind of what got me started. And it broke his heart. It broke my dad's heart. And
if I remember right, you were always telling me that he hated the Yankees so much that once the Giants moved, he refused to support them. And that ultimately led to when the Mets came to town, that was automatically his team, right?
Yeah, he adopted the Mets automatically when the National League finally got because the National League had no baseball team for a few years. I think the Giants and Dodgers, they both left. What was it, around 58? Oh, 57? I don't even remember.
Late 50s, somewhere late 50s.
And I think it was the late 50s. So, yeah, when the Mets came around, he automatically adopted the Mets. I remember he used to be able to get tickets, and a group of us would always go. So back then, they were a fun team. I think the city was happy to have a baseball team, and it didn't even matter that they weren't winning. We would go there, and we would see the young kids and the old veterans that they brought in just to try to give them a name, a face of a franchise. And we hung in there. It was the same thing with football. I mean, it just as young kids, we didn't have social media. We didn't have laptops. We didn't have phones. We got up in the morning and we went downstairs and we played baseball during the spring, summer. We played football during the fall, winter. We segued into basketball, segued into hockey. We would play hockey in the lobby of the building using the mailboxes as like the goalposts. You had to score the goal and you had to hit the puck into the mailboxes.
Only in the Bronx, right?
Yeah, in the Bronx, growing up in the Bronx. It annoyed the older people. We were considered hoodlums for doing that. Imagine such an egregious thing, playing hockey in a lobby of a building. We were hoodlums back then. Just to show you the difference in what a hoodlum is now compared to then. But anyway, we were always outdoors early on, all day long, and until the sun started going down, when everyone knew you better get your ass upstairs.
So eventually, how did you start adopting the Jets and become a fan of them? Like when they won in '69, would that have meant the same thing? Like if they won it now, were you that big of a fan back then, or was it still kind of new?
This is a funny story. I don't even know if I ever told you this. Before I was a Jet fan, my mom and dad bought me one of those. Well, now they have the video games. They bought me one of those electric. You may have seen them. The electric. You plug it in, and the players on the field move from the electric vibrations of the playing field. And the football was a little piece of felt. The teams were neutral. So I bought green paint because I had a choice, the Giants or the Jets. And the Jets were the AFC team, and the young guys back then adopted the Jets. The old guys, like my dad and all the elder seniors, they were all Giant fans. So I was like, oh, I'm not a Giant fan. I'm a Jet fan. I went and bought green paint. I painted these little figures that were attached to the electric game board. And then the football was made of felt. So I would turn this game on and play that for hours, trying to get the ball up and down the field and score touchdowns, playing usually against myself, although sometimes a friend would come upstairs and we would play. Well, I would say that was maybe in the early 60s when they bought me that. Early to maybe 63, 64. And then when they signed Namath in 1965, that was such a big deal at the time. The newspapers, the money he was getting, and I became a more serious football fan as far as watching games on TV. I can't recall watching that many games on TV before they made a lot of noise in the AFC with the Namath signing and all that.
Wasn't it still the AFL?
Yeah.
Right.
Back then, you're right. Back then it was right. You're right. I'm so used to calling it the AFC. Back then it was the AFL. Up until 1970, when the Chiefs won the Super Bowl. After the Chiefs won the Super Bowl, they had the merger. So the Jets won the Super Bowl. Then the AFL Chiefs won the Super Bowl, and then the NFL, I guess they decided, well, we better take them more seriously and merge with them because they're kicking our ass. And they did the right thing. They turned it into a monster. It was great for the fans. But I would say the AFL owned football from that stretch of around 68. You had not just the Jets. You had the Oakland Raiders. They were. Remember, the first two Super Bowls, the Packers played the Chiefs and the Raiders.
Yep. And
the Chiefs were a beast. I mean, they had unbelievable defense, offense, wide receivers. I mean, they were amazing. Len Dawson, quarterback. The Raiders had the Mad Bomber, Darryl LaMonica. They had great receivers, running backs, great defense. They were nasty. They were a beast of a team to play against. And those were my first memories when I started rooting for the Jets of the wars. Remember, the rules were different back then. Yep. You didn't have the kind of rules today. They weren't protecting the quarterback. There was the rules of holding weren't as strict as they were today. The secondary had carte blanche to do whatever they wanted to wide receivers. They played with stick-em, crazy mad stick-em all over their fingers and the gloves. So they were able to easily get picks. But they would beat up wide receivers, and there would be all kinds of in the scrum of the when there's a tackle and the piling on. Ben Davidson broke Namath's jaw with a punch in after. I mean, all kinds of things were going on. So for them to play the game back then, it was more than just a game. It was a war. And those early teams, the Chiefs and the Raiders, they kind of set the tone. The Chargers had a real good team with John Hadel and Lance Allworth. I mean, there were so many good teams and there were so many great players back in those days with the beginning of the AFL. And then when the Jets won the Super Bowl and when the Chiefs the next year also won the Super Bowl, by the way, they beat us to get there. Otherwise, we could have went to 2 straight, but didn't happen. That lends so much credibility to the AFL, hence the merger. But for me as a sports fan, the ride began a love for sports, whether it's Rangers, New York Rangers hockey, whether it's the Knicks basketball, the Jets football, the Mets baseball. The ride for me began in those early 60s. And then when the Mets came along, my father got me going. And then just as young kids, us playing in the grass and playing tackle. And when I was 13 years old, I broke my arm 3 times within 1 year. The first time was playing football. The second 2 times was kind of doing something I shouldn't have been doing, which I'm not a hoodlum, but borderline. Back when I was 13.
I'll let you slide.
Yeah. I was up on this really high ledge where the terraces are, and we climbed up there, and when I jumped off, I landed the wrong way, hairline fracture of the elbow. But anyway, getting back to the love affair began in the early 60s, and then the Mets came along, and that was great, and the Jets came along. The Jets came along, and Namath came along. And
I was just going to ask you, I mean, what was it like in 69 actually being able to work at Shea Stadium? Because I've always been so envious of that. I mean, I couldn't even imagine working in one of these stadiums, let alone during a year where your team actually wins the championship. So what was that experience like?
I was segueing into that because in 60, we always talk about 69, the magical year. 60, you can even go to 67. The Mets became credible in 67. I think they won 70-something games, 73, 74. You Google it. I'm not off by 1 or 2. It was early 70s wins. But suddenly there was buzzing. They're becoming more credible. They had players, pitchers like Tug McGraw, and they just signed Seaver, and he was a rookie. So it was starting to come together. And then in 68, they became even better. But the Jets, they had an awesome season in 68. It was 69 that they played the Super Bowl for the 68 season. Okay. So really, it was the 68 championship, which was played in 69 because it was 68 season. The way they do it now. And Super Bowl in 2022 was really the 2021 season. But so that, the 68 season was a monster season, and 69 was a monster season. And the New York Knicks were off the charts with the team they had, and the Rangers were competitive. They were a playoff team, but they didn't get the championship. Then I'm getting a little bit older, and I want to make some money, and the only thing I was able to do, what was I like around 1967, 68? I was 15, going on 16. I worked. My mother and father freaked out. Me and my friends at midnight, we would leave our houses. We lived in a housing project growing up in the Bronx. We would leave our houses to go to the milk station where the trucks would pull out, and with the milk trucks to deliver milk. And we would say to the drivers, "Do you need a Dugan?" A Dugan is a helper in the Bronx. That's Bronx. So we would ride the trucks from midnight till around 5, 6 in the morning. And I started at $3, not an hour, $3 for the entire night. If we were lucky, we got a cup of coffee and a donut. When the job was done, they would take us to the diner for coffee and a donut or a Danish. So, but I wanted to make a little bit more money, and I went to a Jack in the Box. And I'm sorry if this is boring some of the viewers.
No, I love all this stuff. So
but I went to a Jack in the Box hoping to get a job. Some of my other friends, they had jobs. They were delivering newspapers. They were working at gas stations. They were becoming mechanics. And I went to a Jack in the Box that had just opened, and I said, I'd like to apply for a job. Guy goes, go buy a couple of pair of black jeans and come back and we'll start you. And I'm like, this is great. I went out, spent my own money, bought black jeans. Yeah, the wardrobe, you had to wear black jeans. So I went, got black jeans, showed up and said, when can I start? And they said, well, we've hired a number of people, so right now we can't use anybody else. I was like devastated then. I'm sure that was 1968. 67. Definitely 67. So I went to Shea Stadium. And it was 68. I'm sorry. I went to Shea Stadium. I don't know what gave me the idea. I can't remember what gave me the idea, but I loved the Mets and I loved Shea Stadium. I went to Shea Stadium. I was afraid to ask my father to drive me because he would have been like, what are you, crazy? You know, he would shoot things down before he would thinking about glorifying it.
Yeah.
I had to take 2 buses. I took a bus in the Bronx to one area. Then I took another bus in the Bronx that went to Queens, to Main Street, Flushing. So I took 2 buses to get to Queens. Then I had to get on the subway, the number 7 train, to get to Shea Stadium. All right, so here I am. I'm 15 years old, and I find my way finally to the employment office, and I said, could I apply for a job? And this was before the season began. So I went in and I spoke to John Morley. I'll never forget his name. First guy to give me a chance and give me a break. I even after I left the job, I would go see him. When I would go to a game, I would go out of my way to see him. And he remembered me. It was a great thing. For me, it was a great thing, great feeling. He gave me a short interview. I filled out some papers. And he goes, if you're here on opening day, you've got a job. He goes, this team's becoming good. We won't have enough people. This stadium will be full. And we need people. So show up day one if you want the job. I was there day one. I can't remember though if it was a school day or not, because I do remember in the beginning working weekends and night games, and the day games. Sometimes I would cut school. Sorry to be a bad influence on anybody.
Well, no, I mean that's what I did growing up too. I mean, we always went to all the opening days, and that was always a school day. It was always during the day usually. So. Yeah.
So. Day one, game one, opening day, I'm there, and there's like maybe a couple hundred vendors, and I'm like, oh my God, am I really going to be able to work? They with that upper deck, you remember Shea Stadium?
Oh yeah, I remember.
And that's kind of where they stuck the rookies and the young guys. They stuck them up in the upper deck. But you want to know something? I never minded. I loved the upper deck. There were so many people. There were so many opportunities to make money. I remember back then, we would get $2 for a tray of soda. I'm trying to remember how many sodas were on the tray. It may have been 20, 25, but whatever it was, I would go out with a tray of soda, and it would take me maybe 20 minutes, and I was done with the tray of soda. I would go back and get a second tray. Eventually, I learned take 2 trays. And it was hard for me. I was maybe 90 something pounds. I was a little guy, and imagine going up those stairs in the upper deck. And I had kind of a fear of heights and all that. But it was an amazing thing being there, being with those crowds in that environment with the team I loved. And for me, it wasn't work. Even when I worked the Jet games, and I froze because back then I didn't know how to dress. Nobody told me. I had to learn. Go with layers.
Especially that wind coming off the bay. Yeah.
Oh my God. Yeah. You prayed to sell hot chocolate on those days. You really, if you sold soda, you were basically dead. Nobody wanted to deal with peanuts and anything that they had to take their gloves off. So if you got hot chocolate, you made money. Hot dogs, maybe. You might make some money with hot dogs. I'll never forget one time when I was doing the hot dogs at Shea Stadium. We carried those massive metal bins. I knocked a bald guy in the head with the corner of the bin. And this was a huge dude that looked like he was going to kill me. And I was so apologetic. I kept apologizing, and I could see the dent in his head, but I didn't draw blood. I didn't draw blood. And that was like scary. But generally, I did really well. I made money. I ended up saving enough money to buy my first car, which I wrecked shortly after getting it. But never mind that. So it like I was saying, it all began in '68. It was for me, that was magical, and then '69 was totally insane. When there were times, if I wanted, I could use my pass and get into the building and not work. Wow. There were times if I didn't want to work, I would just wait around and see when there were open seats that didn't look like they were going to be taken, and I would sit somewhere at field level, and I didn't. I mean, the first year and a half, probably first 2 years, I would always work, and then after they won the championship, I think I got a little bit lazy, and then I started picking and choosing when I wanted to work, when I wanted to watch a game. It was great. If you look at the picture on the Daily News when the Mets won the World Series after Cleon Jones made that final catch, and everybody stormed the field, including me and my friends that were at the game. My friends got tickets. I was able to get in with my pass. They hated me,
Cool.
But I didn't work that day. I sat near them. My friends were in the upper deck. I sat near them. I remember sitting on the concrete stairs of the upper deck, and that was good enough for me. And then when it looked like they were going to do it, we all went downstairs to the field level, and we ran on. We jumped off the dugout onto the field, and on the front page of the Daily News, I think I might have a copy of it.
I think you still do. I remember you packing it up, I think, when we were moving. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a picture. I was sitting on my friend's shoulders, and you can see there wasn't that many people sitting on people's shoulders. I know it was me. And because I remember we were somewhere around between home plate and the pitcher's mound, and there were thousands on the field. And it was just, I took home grass from that field, and over the years, it ended up being sawdust. Yeah. And I should have saved the dirt, and eventually I never did. I never saved that. I never saved the baseball cards that my mom helped clean up my room and get rid of. So, who knew back then? Who knew about the value of baseball cards? I mean, well, some people did. They collected. But
what was the yearly tradition? You just tossed them out the windows and you put them in bicycle tires or whatever else?
Yeah, a lot of guys would put them in the spokes of their bicycles, and it would be a cool thing to hear the baseball cards when the wheels turning. And a lot of guys their boxes, and we would love to see them flying in the air at the end of a season, and the grass littered with thousands of baseball cards. All the guys would do it, and I remember looking down out the window at all those cards in the grass. And I look back now and I'm saying, well, potentially that could have been millions.
That's exactly what it was.
Willie Mays.
Yeah, all those cards from the 50s and 60s now are just worth tons, especially if they're in good condition. So,
right. The other thing I was going to talk about in getting to being the sportsaholic that I became, the Knicks also were really big in becoming a major sports fan, because that team that they had, they were so close in 68 and 69. I'm sorry, in 67 and 68. And both years, the Baltimore Bullets at the time, before they became the Washington Bullets, and now they're the Washington Wizards. Yeah. But the then Baltimore Bullets, 2 years in a row, 67, 68, both years they beat us in the playoffs, and that Baltimore Bullet team, if you Google it and look into them, they were an amazing. They have to all be Hall of Famers. I don't know. They had Wes Unseld at center. They had Earl Monroe, who people look at me like I'm an absolute lunatic when I say to them, and I include Michael Jordan in the conversation, that for me, Earl Monroe, Oscar Robertson, and the Nick, the guard.
Which one?
Huh?
Which one?
The announcer now.
Oh, Frazier. Walt Frazier.
Yeah, Walt Frazier. I don't know how I can forget his name. Yeah, I lost it there for a second. But for years, I argued with anybody that I could argue with that in my book, Earl Monroe, Walt Frazier, and Oscar Robertson, in my book, were the three greatest players that ever played basketball. And, I know the rules changed, the game changed, three-pointers. Michael Jordan is Michael Jordan in his era. Sure, he's the GOAT, the greatest. But if in those days, if you watch the film and footage of what Earl Monroe did in those days, he won a championship. He flew in the air, defied gravity, and nobody knows back then how he did it. He was a monster at his position. And Wes Unseld, Jack Marin, and they had so many all-star players up and down the lineup, and we couldn't beat them for 2 years, 67, 68. In 1969, in the playoffs, here we go again. We're playing against the Baltimore Bullets, and I'm a young kid, but I'm thinking, oh, my God, they keep kicking our ass. We beat them. In that playoff, we beat that team, that monster. Pretty sure it was 7 games. And then after that, we had to play the Milwaukee Bucks. The Milwaukee Bucks. They had Lou Alcindor, who is Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and Oscar Robertson, and they had other great players. I can't remember all their names, but they had an all-star loaded team that was a monster, a beast. Nobody gave us a chance. We beat that team. Lou Alcindor, Oscar Robertson. One of the reasons why I would always say Oscar Robertson was one of the greatest players ever. He, as far as I know, he's the only person that has averaged a triple-double for the entire season. A whole season of basketball, a triple-double. So for me, automatically, that's got to put him in a category with nobody else. Who else did it? Nobody. I don't think. It's been talked about so many times.
I know some guys more recently have come close. I think like Russell Westbrook more recently, he's come close, but I don't think he actually did it though.
I know there's a lot of guys with a lot of triple doubles. And then for what Walt Frazier did for that the Knick team, and what he brought to the franchise, and then when Willis Reed got hurt in that championship season, Walt Frazier willed that team. He taught that team how to play defense. He taught that team how to spread the ball, how to pass the ball, how to play team offense, team defense. And because of the lack of social media back then, a real basketball fan might know it. A true Knick fan back then will certainly know it, never forget it. But it goes kind of unheralded because of lack of social media. But he really taught that team, and he was a young guy. He was still young and growing with the team in the position. But he walked in and helped them learn how to. I've heard him online joke about, I'm here with these bunch of. He never used the word losers, but I can't remember how he described the team that he walked into, and he was like mortified in the beginning, and he willed them to win and put up huge numbers, and how he played defense, offense, he played rebounds, he did everything, and then you get to what was the third guy?
Willis Reed, Frazier. Didn't they get Monroe?
Yeah, it was Frazier, Monroe, and Oscar Robertson. To me, those three guys are really among the best ever. And I know there's so many other guys that anybody will tweet me or text me and say, well, you forgot about Bill Russell, who was the monster. He won 11 championships in 13 seasons. He was an absolute monster. But he was a defensive-minded player that was a monster that helped will his teams to win. And that those Celtics teams had a lot of great offensive players. So he was, I don't want to say a one-way player because he played his position well and he got his points. But Will Chamberlain was certainly a better center than Bill Russell. But Will Chamberlain couldn't win as many championships as Bill Russell did, and Will Chamberlain lost to Willis Reed in the championship. So, Will Chamberlain's a great, great player, an undeniable Hall of Famer, one of the best ever. But
it's so crazy to have all three of those teams at once being what they were. I mean, I would love to just see one of these teams in my lifetime win, but to have three in 1 year, it's just insane.
That Celtic team. That Celtic team, that the Chamberlain was with the Philadelphia 76ers before he later on went to the Lakers. So he started with the 76ers. So you had the Sixers were really good. The Celtics were really good. The Knicks were becoming really good. That Baltimore Bullet team was a beast. The Lakers were starting. The Lakers were really good with Jerry West, Elgin Baylor. I forgot Elgin Baylor before because there will be people that will tweet you later and said, your father forgot Elgin Baylor. Elgin Baylor was really, truly one of the best players ever. And throw him in with the other three or four that I mentioned. Elgin Baylor, it was such a monster and pair him with Jerry West, who was one of the greatest players ever. Also, in terms of shooting and scoring. So, and that Milwaukee Buck team was unbelievable. And the Portland team with, I can't remember his name. He was a center. He was like a monster, a beast. He was an incredible player, but he had major foot problems and got hurt, surgeries, and was never able. I think they won one championship, but he may have been better than everybody. The name will come to me later, I'm sure, or I'll Google and look it up. But if you look up Portland back in the late 60s, early 70s, he was just an unbelievable player, scorer, defender. And I know that team won one championship, and then he ran into all kinds of injury problems. But basketball back then, I know things are different now, and it's maybe a little more hard to follow with player movement as rapidly as we see it now. But back then, the monster teams and the monster matchups and the rivalries it was addicting, and it got me hooked on basketball. So think about that, starting from the early 60s and then starting to snowball around 67, 68 with the Mets starting to become relevant and the Jets signing Namath and the Knicks becoming relevant and the Rangers hanging in there with, they make the playoffs. Okay, they got eliminated, but they were at the dance. And then all of a sudden, the Knicks are in the playoffs. Well, they were, but they got eliminated. But all of a sudden, 68, they're in the playoffs and they win it. And it was the Jets first. The Jets first won the championship. And that was like, wow, what an amazing thing. So imagine as a young kid being a sportsaholic and being treated to a championship from the 68 season, which the Super Bowl was in 1969. So you had a championship in January 12th, 1969. And then the Mets became that monster right after the Super Bowl, that entire season. Well, not the entire season. They started out slowly because they were nine and a half games out of first place. And then they went on a run of all runs and with the culmination in 69 of winning that championship. And then when the dust is not even settled, the Knicks are on their run, on their way, as the Rangers were at the same time. So we're treated to good hockey, a playoff team, and we're treated to the Knicks team for the third straight year.
One day I'll be so lucky.
For me, it was a privilege, a treat. I thought it would happen year after year after year. And then again in 70, the Knicks, after the 69 season, the Knicks won the championship in 70, and they did it again in 73. And, unfortunately after that, things happen.
Mets almost did it in 73.
Huh?
Mets almost did it in 73.
The World Series. Yeah. They went to the World Series, and the umps screwed us because we were up 2-1 on the Oakland Athletics, who had a Hall of Fame team. They had a team loaded with Hall of Famers, and we're up 2-1 on that team. And in game 4, we should have been. I know people will say, "Yeah, should have, could have, would have," and the haters will say, "But you didn't." You're right, we didn't. But everyone clearly says there was a play at the plate, and a Met was safe at the plate. I can't remember who it was. I remember there was one play where Willie Mays was safe. It could have been that play, but I don't want to go out on a limb and say that, and then people will say, wrong. All I know is there was a play at the plate. The ump made the out call, and all the experts say the man was safe at the plate, and we would have won that game with the safe call. We would have been up 3-1. There would have been no need to start Seaver on 3 days rest, which they should have. The feeling was they should have saved him for Game 7, because the series was tied 2-2, and they wanted Seaver to pitch game.
I think they end up winning Game 5, and then they had Seaver pitch Game 6 on 3 days rest. I'm pretty sure, because they could have saved him, I think, for normal rest for Game 7.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah,
right?
Something that's right. They lost Game 6 and 7.
Yeah,
they lost Game 6 and 7 because in Game 6 they pitched Seaver on 3 days rest, and everybody said Yogi Berra should have saved him for a possible Game 7. So. I had a memory lapse on that one. I thought Oakland. Went. No, you're right. It could. Anyway, things started going downhill in the 70s with Namath getting hurt quite often, and after 73, we faced injury problems, and then we lose Seaver, which was incredibly ridiculous the way we lost Seaver. We lost Nolan Ryan, a Hall of Fame pitcher, for a washed-up third baseman. Sorry if Jim Fregosi is out there listening, but he was beyond his prime, and who knows what the Mets were thinking. But
that was pretty much a rough decade after the Knicks and Mets won it in 70, or the Mets went there in 73 and the Knicks won it. But going back to the Jets a little bit, what ultimately led to you becoming a season ticket holder when you did? I know you always bring up that one game with the Packers where the Jets closed the playoffs and everyone stormed the field there. They tore down the goalpost. So you want to get into that?
The 70s, thankfully, were starting to expire, and the 80s began, and they started drafting more quality players. They were drafting in the early 80s, guys like Joe Klecko and Marty Lyons and Mark Gastineau, and Richard Todd was going to be the next Joe Namath. So I wanted to start going to more games, and we did go to a bitter cold. It was the last game of the season, a bitter cold game. It was like in the single digits at Shea Stadium, and we were sitting in the bleachers in the end zone, and the Jets won that game and beat up, I forget the name of the quarterback, but they beat up that quarterback real good that day, sacked him, I believe it was 6 or 7 times. And at the end of the game, everyone was thrilled. I'm trying to remember if we made the playoffs that game. I think we did.
Yeah, didn't that clinch it?
Yeah, I think that clinched the playoffs.
Yeah.
And everyone stormed the field, tore the field up, and tore down the goalposts. And it was at the end of that season, I said, I want season tickets. And I ended up getting season tickets at Shea Stadium. And I can remember seeing O.J. Simpson running all over us before we became real good. That might have been when I was working there. The O.J. stuff. That was probably when I was working there.
Yeah, he was in the 70s, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I loved the fact that I became a season ticket holder. Back then, I'm not sure how many remember it. A lot of the older people, seniors, might remember it. Back then, the Jets chant was the Jets chant, only it was dueling. It was dueling Jet chants from different parts of the stadium. So and I can't remember if Fireman Ed or any of the other current.
There's a whole video online on YouTube that you got to check out that talks about the entire origin of the Jets chant and how it started with a bunch of different sections going back and forth. And I think Ed's even in the video. He talks about some things.
Yeah, that was great. I found that so incredible, and between the conditions. The weather conditions with the wind and everything else, and knowing teams really didn't want to come to Shea Stadium and play in that stadium. It wasn't a great field. The field was hard as a rock. It always looked torn up. You couldn't even see green. The grass was brown. It just the fan base, the attitude, the chants. It was so incredible. It was great, and it's unfortunate that so many fans from other teams seem to take over the stadiums, and I can't remember that being an issue not until the Meadowlands, and even in the old Meadowlands, I felt like we had a little bit more of a home field advantage.
Much more. I mean, we were at every single game, from the 90s through the early 2000s. And we knew everybody in our section. It was the same people every week. It was 80,000 filled. There weren't opposing fans there. And everybody was standing. You had the defense chants going. You had the Jet chants going. It never mattered that the team was bad. Like, you went there and you had a good time. Like, that's what it was. And now I just feel like, like you were saying before, with social media and the phones, the opposing fans, there's so many different elements now where it's like it's not the same environment. And I feel bad for the younger generation that's missing out on it.
When there was all the talk about the Jets possibly, with the new Meadowlands, possibly coming to the west side of Manhattan by the West Side Yards, and they would build a stadium over Penn Station or near Penn Station over the rail yards. I was hoping for anything that would happen, and that would be our own stadium. And I would, even if they would have went back to Queens or Long Island, I would have gone anywhere if we could have had a stadium with just a complete home field advantage, with our entire fan base filling up the stadium, because it does make a difference, and the players deserve that. I know the fans deserve a winning product, and many years we didn't have that. But we all hang in. The true fan base. Listen, our teams are our teams. I'm not going to be a bandwagon or fair weather. One day, God willing, they'll win again. And we're seeing positive signs. Let it all come to fruition. And maybe 1969. I wanted to throw an analogy out there. and I don't want to jinx anything,
Go for it.
but 68, 69, 70, magical years. Well, guess what? I'm 68. I'm going on 69. Next year I'll be 70. Very possibly, maybe the Mets can do it this year as I'm turning from 68 to 69. And then maybe the Jets can play the kind of season that we'll all be proud of this year in 19. And as I'm turning from 69 to 70, and next year maybe we're a playoff team and in the hunt for a Super Bowl, and and the Rangers are looking real good. So I see a change, a turnaround. I'm always optimistic. I always start out every season real optimistic. You know what I was thinking of the other day? I was thinking of how many games that we went to at Shea Stadium where the building shook. That's where the stadium, you could feel stadium.
The one I'll never forget. I think we were talking about it a few weeks ago. The 2000 series where they clinched it in Game 5 against the Cardinals, where Timo Perez caught the last out after Jay Payton got drilled and he was out of the game. That I felt like that building, because we were the last row of the mezzanine, and for those that haven't been to Shea, you can't see like the last maybe 100 feet of the outfield. So like we were ducking our heads trying to see the last out get caught. Once he caught that ball, I felt like the upper deck was about to collapse right on top of us. I had never felt a building shake like that.
I'm sure I may have mentioned it, and I'm sorry if I'm redundant, but I don't know how many people out there know this. That stadium, the field level seats were on wheels, and they had to make it from a baseball stadium into a football stadium. They had to roll the stands out from home plate out towards the outfield to create the football field. So the stadium, the lower level, and at least the lower level anyway, was on wheels. And we were in the mezzanine, as you said, and I always remember the whole stadium moving, which for me was an unthinkable, unimaginable thing. I couldn't believe it. Couldn't believe it. It was magical. It was really so magical. Just everything about Shea Stadium. I mean, I know Citi Field is our stadium, and we have to adopt it and love it. It's our home field. But Shea Stadium with the elements, you had to embrace the elements. You had to love it.
Yeah, it was a legitimate home field advantage.
They drew up to 69,000 fans in that stadium with standing room. So the crowds that they would get, the magical, so many magical moments. I just, I know it's like crazy and all that. I just wish somehow they could have created a new Shea Stadium, mimicking somewhat and updating it a little.
I think I'll actually give the Mets some credit. I feel like they've done a good job with Citi Field as far as making it more like home with the Seaver statue and the Shea Bridge and things like that. Over the years, they've made it more like home.
They should paint the seats orange and blue and get rid of those hunter green or gray or whatever you call them.
I agree with that too.
No, come on, we're Mets. We're orange and blue.
It's fine though. Go ahead.
Okay?
No, go ahead.
I was just thinking with Shea Stadium and so many huge memories, with the cat running out on in 1969 in front of the Cubs dugout and looking at the players in the Cubs dugout and the looks on their faces like this can't be happening. And Leo DeRocha, who was a fiery manager and a former New York manager, and now he's in the Cubs dugout. We were 9.5 games out of first place. We're starting to win games. It's June turning into July, and then we had that series. Pretty sure it was a 3-game series where Seaver pitches the near perfect game. With 1 out in the 9th inning. Jimmy Qualls, Nobody ever heard of him. And after that game, nobody ever heard of him again. Singles off Tom Seaver in the 9th inning, went out, and Seaver, pitched the one hitter, perfect game, and we swept the Cubs. It was July 8th, 9th, and 10th. I know the near perfect game was July 9th. I'll never forget that date. It was such a magical moment. I'm standing there as a young kid saying, this is really, I knew then, years from now, it would be still talked about. I'm like, this can't be happening, that we're taking this team. And that Cub team, Billy Williams, Ron Santo, they had Hall of Famers, Ernie Banks. They had the pitchers they had were unbelievable. They had a great team, and they had a huge lead, and we started coming along. We swept that series. We went on a big winning streak. We went on a huge run from then towards the end till the end of the year. We went past them. We took over first place. Just unbelievable how everything mushroomed and culminated, and that Atlanta team that we beat in the playoffs. I mean, Hank Aaron, Davey Johnson. They had so many great hitters on that team, and also great pitching on that team. To beat that team, and then beat the Baltimore Orioles, and again, if I'm repeating myself, that Baltimore Oriole team, Brooks Robinson, Bill, the other Robinson, they had two Robinsons. They had 420-game winners. They had so many Hall of Famers, so many great players. They were a monster of a team, and to beat that kind of a team with all that pitching that they had was just unbelievable. Isn't it really strange? And it's probably been talked about so many times how that Jets team and the Mets team and the Knicks team all beat teams from Baltimore. Yeah. The Baltimore Orioles, the Baltimore Colts, and the Baltimore Bullets.
And they were all massive underdogs too. I'm not sure about the Knicks, but I know the Mets and Jets in those series, they were huge underdogs.
Yeah, the Jets were 18 and a half point underdogs, and at a poolside press conference, Namath, he was probably kind of joking, and the reporter was kind of getting on him about, you guys really don't have much of a chance, and Namath's like, oh, we'll win the game, and matter of fact, I guarantee it. And I don't know if to this day he'll probably say, oh no, I meant it, and we meant it. And they say they looked at film and were kind of laughing, and Coach Eubank had to pull the reins and pump the brakes on them and say, listen, anyone can lose to anybody, and they're a great football team, so let's not laugh. But there was talk that they were laughing at some of the film they watched, and just the fact, Namath will probably never admit that he might have had tongue in cheek when he said, yeah, well, I think we'll win the game. And in fact, I guarantee it. And of course, that blew up to what it became. But 18 and a half point underdogs, nobody gave the Mets any chance at all. I remember Yankee fan friends, laughing at me. Yeah, you guys got this far, but that's it for you guys. You'll never go any further. You'll never do anything. It was just amazing, so magical. And then throw on top of that, back then we were huge, us kids, we were huge boxing fans, because back then boxing was so unbelievably magical. I don't follow it as much as I do today. I think MMA may be eclipsing it in popularity.
It's starting to grow a lot faster than boxing. I feel like there's not as many household names with boxing as there used to be.
But back then, with all the Ali, Frazier, and the three fights, and Ali Norton and their three fights, and Ali Foreman, and you had so many great heavyweights, Ernie Shavers, and then you had all kinds of Roberto Duran, oh my God! Yet there were so many lightweights and welterweights. It was an amazing time just to watch boxing and experience boxing. I was thinking about Seaver with that game when he struck out the last 10 guys of the game.
Yeah. I remember you telling me a lot about that as a kid.
I mean, what I still think about that, and I'm like, it seems so improbable.
I wonder what his pitch count was. If they would have even allowed that today.
Somebody this year strike out 9 in a row?
Maybe somebody might have came close to it recently, 8 or 9.
They were talking about somebody that struck out 9 in a row, and but it wasn't
probably Alcantara.
It wasn't at the end of the game. No, it was somebody on Minnesota, I think. Some young stud they have. I think they were talking about a young stud on Minnesota, and I thought they said he struck out 9 in a row earlier in the season. But this was at the end of a game where, you're thinking, well, maybe the pitcher's a little bit tired, and the last 10 guys of the game. Here's another good memory for any Met fans out there. Imagine the New York Mets, and they weren't relevant yet. I think this was before the World Series. Imagine the New York Mets going up against Steve Carlton, a Hall of Fame pitcher, and he strikes out 19 Mets on that day. 19 New York Mets on that game. And the Philadelphia Phillies are winning that game 3-2. The Mets got 2 runs on a Ron Swoboda homer off Steve Carlton. Well, guess what? Ron Swoboda comes up to bat again late in the game against Steve Carlton again with a guy on base. I'll never forget Bob Murphy's call of that moment. It's something stick with you your whole life.
Yeah. You hit another one?
As he's coming to the plate, Bob Murphy blurts out, "Can lightning strike twice?" Swoboda hits a home run. The Mets beat Steve Carlton 4-3, and Murphy's going off the wall that he doesn't believe it happened. Unimaginable things. The black cat, the things that Seaver did, the perfect game, Ron Swoboda, the diving catches in the World Series that some people said he had his eyes closed.
Shoe polish.
He was always an average player. He was never a Gold Glove Hall of Famer, but Tommy Agee with the circus catches that he made and so many things. They platooned at third base. They platooned at second base. They got their first baseman slugger right at the trading deadline, Don Clendenin, and that was a catalyst. That was the World Series MVP. Speaking of MVP, I wanted to bring this up. Over the years, and I'm kind of getting totally off the base here, but over the years, there's been so much talk about the New York Jets and Matt Snell being estranged, and they don't talk, and Matt Snell doesn't go to any events, and he's in the Ring of Honor, yet he didn't show up for the event. Emerson Boozer called him. All kinds of Jets reached out to him, and there's confusion, and nobody really even knows for sure why it happened. I won't even say what I read because I don't want to spread any false. But the reason I'm bringing this up, Matt Snell was such a huge part. It's heartbreaking in a way. Matt Snell was such a huge part of that team and that championship. He ran for over 120 yards. It was like 123 or 121. And the big thing, it was almost like a rope-a-dope because Emerson Boozer was their halfback. He was their main running back. Matt Snell was the fullback. He was usually the lead backer in the I formation or the split formation. Back then, it was more simplified. It wasn't the RPOs and all that. It was pretty much split formation, I formation. and Matt Snell would lead the blocking most of the time. Emerson Boozer would get his yardage, have great. What hurt Emerson Boozer was injuries, unfortunately, but he was a great back and did all the heavy lifting. But in the Super Bowl, we rope-a-doped the Baltimore Colts. Matt Snell became the go-to guy. They were probably keying on Emerson Boozer, no doubt. And Matt Snell runs for 121 yards. And I understand Joe Namath is the prodigy, the guy, the leader, and one of my idols as a young kid, one of the heroes, one of the reasons I love sports. But I can be an honest fan saying, we scored 16 points that day. We had a lot of help with our defense. We had, I think, 4 interceptions that day, maybe 5. I know we had a ton. Randy Beverly had 2 interceptions. There were at least 4 interceptions. But you can make a case for the field goal kicker being the MVP. Anyway, I kind of had feelings that maybe Matt Snell could have been or should have been the MVP because he kept the ball moving down the field. And Namath wasn't putting the ball up in the air a whole lot that game. He had a little over 100 yards passing. He had some nice throws. He did have some big throws in the game
maybe that just went back to what they saw on film, like you said before, like when they were laughing at the film. Maybe that's just what they saw, where they could just control the clock, ground and pound, keep Unitas on the bench.
Yeah, matter of fact, they rope-a-doped the Colts also on Maynard. They didn't go to Maynard as much as the other wide receiver. I'm drawing a blank now. How could I forget his name? He was so great. I'll think of it. But anyway, they went to the split end. Back then they called them wide receivers and split ends. And Don Maynard was more of a wide receiver. Anyway, Matt Snell had such an incredible game that game. And, I know Namath got some yards, but it was a little over 100. I don't know if that had anything to do with it, Namath being named the MVP. I don't know if he felt jaded or if there were other things that happened later on after the Super Bowl. But Matt Snell was such a real good player for the team, and I hope one day they can find a way to get him back into the stadium for just a hero's welcome. I don't think he ever got the hero's welcome. So many guys over the years got their hero welcomes, and I really always felt he deserved that. So,
no, absolutely, definitely deserved.
Yeah.
But going back to more recent, you were saying before about the stadium and how you wish they could have built that on the west side. I still remember being at Hofstra, and I think we bought the shirts that one year. It said "Build It" or something like that. What do you remember just going back from Hofstra? Because the training camp experience now, I feel like, is just so different. Where you go for a couple hours and that's kind of it. Where back in the day, I just remember it was a full day experience where, you had the 2-hour drive to Long Island. You had the morning practice, which was usually full pads, 2.5 hours. It was hitting. I remember Parcells always yelling at guys. And then you had the lunch break in between where the players were always great. We went across the street. They would sign autographs. And then they'd come back at like 4:00 and you'd have another 2-hour practice.
Yeah, the two days were great. It was an entire day. There were a lot more autograph signing. It was a great experience. I remember seeing Mark Gastineau riding on a bicycle on campus, and I'm like, this is unbelievable. You could talk to players. It was such a fantastic experience for fans and young kids. I remember bringing your sister Carrie. She was really young, and we were trying to get autographs back then, and it was a great day, a fun day, amazing times. I mean, we're there in the Meadowlands, but one of these days they got to figure out. Well, winning will be a great cure for the fan base.
Winning helps everything, but
Yeah.
I still think they've already pushed out like so many of the loyal diehard fans, just with the PSLs and everything else. So I feel like it's more than winning. I think there's a lot of fans that want to come back, and it's not just the winning; it's the environment, it's the atmosphere. It's not like what it used to be. Hopefully, winning can bring some of that back.
Yeah, I really think winning will bring a lot of it back. The New York City, and I include New Jersey. I know a lot of New Jersey people say, "What do you mean New York City?" I know they play in New Jersey, but the tri-state area Jets, the New York, New Jersey, whatever you want to call them, I really know they're hungry for a winner, and I know the Giant fans have had their Super Bowls, but I'm sure there are a lot of on the fence fans that root for both. I know people that tell me I root for both. So I have no doubt that we'll fill more seats with a winner, and I think you're going to see a difference this season because that draft. I mean, what happened in that draft for me was magical. What I saw, all the hard work that went into it, the process with the scouting and the attention to details and just everything about it, this has to be right. This has to be the right way, the right road, the right protocol. And
what for you would be a successful season then? I mean, is that making the playoffs? Is that meaningful games in December? Is that Zach Wilson taking a sizable leap? I mean, what for you is successful for year two?
A successful season. I would say no less than 500. I hear a lot of talk about they're a 6-7 win team. For me, I don't think a 7-win team is that great of a team. I think if you're a good team and they've done so much with drafting and free agency, you should be able to field a team that can win half of your games and to continue the answer to the question of what would make this a successful season. In December, when the calendar turns and it's December 1, I want to hear on the NFL Network or ESPN or on Let's Talk Jets Radio, I want to hear the words, "We are playing meaningful football with the chance to make the playoffs. We are in the hunt, and it is the month of December." And if we can win our games, and what is there, usually 5 games in the month of December based on the calendar, and maybe a game, maybe it spills over into January.
So I think there's like 2 January games.
We looked at the schedule. I looked at the schedule. I don't see a reason why they can't win 9 games. And there are a lot of borderline games. And if they're really good and they stay healthy, why not win 9 or 10 games? And I know a lot of people out there will say, "Oh, he's really drinking the Kool-Aid." But if you really look at the body of work that Joe Douglas and the entire team that they've done from top to bottom, and I don't know all the names, so I don't want to leave anyone out, but I'll say the entire Jets team, coaches, scouts, management, what they have done in everything, in all facets, I don't see why they can't make that happen. And I know health is a big part of it. So, but again, they've done a huge part in making sure that we have a lot of backups. We doubled up on tight ends. We doubled up in the secondary. We've seen the double up at edge. I believe we added on a little there.
Jermaine Johnson, and they're getting Carl Lawson back too.
Right. We added on at running back. We've added on in the secondary. So I would have to say, where are we really lacking? What will be an Achilles heel that's going to keep us from at least winning 8-9 games, and maybe that 10th magical game if we know and learn how to win a close game. I know we're going to need a good field goal kicker. I know we need to not have bad penalties in late games. We're going to have to be disciplined. There's so many intangibles. So if we do all the right things, why can't we be staring at the possibility of winning that 9th and 10th game in the month of December? And hey, who says we can't make the playoffs? I don't see why not. I'm always a firm believer. I'm a sports junkie. I'm a Jets, Mets, Knicks, Rangers junkie, and I sometimes, this is totally off the wall, but every now and then I'll watch a movie like It's a Wonderful Life, for instance. And it's a really emotional, and it's such a great movie. And I sometimes I look at that and I'm saying, George Bailey was the main character in It's a Wonderful Life. And sometimes I'll look at that and I'll say, George Bailey, you ain't got nothing on me. Because I feel just really, even though there's been dry years, I still feel blessed that, between the Mets and even forgetting about 69, 73, 86, they went back in 88. They were relevant. 2000, 1990 they were relevant. In 2000 they were relevant. In 2005, 6, 7 they were relevant. 2015. There's been a lot of great rides that the Mets have had over the years. I feel really blessed as a Met fan. I feel blessed in a lot of ways that we've had great teams to root for. Even after the 69 season, the 80s team with the Sack Exchange. That whole crew, that really could have been a Super Bowl team.
That was something I wanted to go back and ask you before, as far as the firing with Walt Michaels and Joe Walton. I always remember you telling me some stories as a kid that I think it was Walt Michaels that kind of got the short end of the stick on that.
Well, yeah,
it kind of forced him out.
Leon Hess was very, very image conscious because he also owned oil companies with Hess, and everything had to be proper in what the team did and said because it could reflect on the stock price of Hess Oil or the people buying Hess fuel or buying Hess stock. So I always knew that Hess was very strict on a lot of things, and I loved Hess as an owner. But when Walt Michaels was a very, very Mike Ditka like in that mold, very rough. He'll say what's on his mind. He's not afraid to speak his mind. And during that playoff run, when we had a rough time, we beat the Raiders, but somebody called Walt Michaels in the locker room at halftime saying they were Al Davis. And Walt Michaels thinks in some way Al Davis was up to something to distract and get away from maybe the halftime meetings they have. And at the end, the Jets beat the Raiders in that game. But at the end of the game, Walt Michaels went off. He went on a rant about Al Davis and the Raiders, their organization. And then there was an additional rant about the Mud Bowl.
Yep.
When Don Shula is hosing down the field because we had Freeman McNeil. Nobody could keep up with his speed. We had Al Toon, Wesley Walker. Nobody could keep up with their speed. We had speed on defense that everyone was having a problem with. So they did a nice job that day, and it rained. No tarp on the field were the reports. And unfortunately, Richard Todd's favorite receiver that day was A.J. Dewey, 2 interceptions, and that was the game. So Walt Michaels has another rant, and behind the curtain. Yeah, you remember the Roman Empire and back in the days, Spartacus and all that. All the evil doings behind the curtains and the backstabbing. Well, behind the curtains is Walton. Forget his first name.
Joe
Can you
Walton,
believe
right?
that? Huh?
Joe Walton, right?
Yeah, right. Joe Walton. So Joe Walton was poisoning Leon Hess's mind, according to reports. I'm not saying it. I'm just going by what I've read back then and everything they talked about in the papers. There wasn't really much sports talk. There was very little sports talk on the radio. That Joe Walton was cuddling up real nice to Leon Hess, and Walt Michaels got fired. And with Walt Michaels was a real.
I thought he technically resigned.
I can't remember when it was beginning. I know he had real health problems afterwards. But
I know it was right after the Mud Bowl. It was like 2 or 3 weeks afterwards. But I thought he actually resigned, like stating that he wanted to spend more time with his family. He's been in football for 50-something years.
I think he died years later because I remember him being.
No, not died. Resigned instead of getting fired. I don't think they actually fired him.
Well, I'm pretty sure he got fired.
I thought he ended up resigning. It was like 2 or 3 weeks after the Mud Bowl.
Pretty sure he was.
I'll take your word over mine, but I thought he ended up resigning, even if it was the team ultimately pushing him out.
I'll Google it after and text you. But Walt Michaels was a defensive-minded coach, and they built a real killer defense. Joe Walton, he had great tools to work with, with Al Toon, Wesley Walker, Freeman McNeil. But somehow Joe Walton couldn't put it all together, and we underperformed, underachieved, and Joe Walton ended up getting fired. And then we went into real dry.
He was there for the one run, right? With where they played the Browns, where they blew the 10-point lead with Gastineau and the rough and the passer.
Yeah, we had a 10-point lead. We had a 10-point lead with 3.5 minutes left. And the Cleveland Browns had a 4th down, and Mark Gastineau roughed the quarterback, giving Bernie Kosar and the Browns a 1st down. They go down the field, and they ended up getting a field goal, or they may have gotten the touchdown first, and then they got the ball back and got the field goal, and they tied the game and won it in double overtime. And it was a real shame because our opponent in the championship game would have been the Denver Broncos. In the regular season, I know the regular season doesn't always mean anything, but during the regular season, we beat the Broncos 31-0. I'll never forget that score. I'll never forget that game. I'll never forget how all I was thinking is, my goodness, we're beating the Browns and we're going to face the Broncos, who we handled fairly well. We've got a real shot here. I felt like that team had a real shot and belonged in the Super Bowl.
I felt the exact same way in '98 because we played the Falcons in the regular season that year, absolutely destroyed them. I'm pretty sure they didn't have their starting quarterback at the time, but we put up like 40-something points. We destroyed them.
I remember that.
And then we had the 10-0 lead at Denver, and we blow that at the half.
Yeah, that was the Steelers, right?
No, Denver. That was Denver.
Oh, it's Denver. Oh, then the other one was the Steelers.
Yep. Yeah, the Steelers was 2011, and then the year before that was the Colts. The 2010 year was like, they kind of snuck in that year, 9 wins. You didn't really expect much. It was Rex's first year. The year after that, that's where the expectations were a lot higher. You had Sanchez in his second year. I think everybody expected a better showing with the Steeler game.
Yeah, there were a lot of great years where they made the playoffs. They had a shot, where they got close. They were sniffing it. They were on the verge of sniffing it and fell short. But,
Even though this probably wasn't a Super Bowl team, my favorite run still, I talk about it all the time, with the back-to-back games where they clinched against the Packers in Week 17, and then they had the home game because they ended up winning the division that week. They had the home game against Peyton Manning the following week, and then they played 41-0. It was pretty much the exact same crowd from the week before, and Manning, he didn't stand a chance. That building was nuts.
The game where we clinched the division, wasn't that the game where we were waiting on the results of the New England-Miami game?
Yep.
And every time an update of the score, the crowd would go crazy, and the players were wondering why the crowd was going crazy.
Yeah, and I remember too, we walked into the building. They didn't even have the scores from the other games, because I think they assumed, both games weren't going to come out the way that we needed it to. The Patriots, they were down by like 10 points in the last few minutes, so it looked like the Jets weren't making the playoffs. So they didn't even have, I don't remember it. I don't remember seeing any of the scores on the scoreboard at all. So everybody was just kind of, paying attention to whoever had the Walkman to give them the updates in the seats. And I remember the guy that was a few rows in front of us, he was announcing the game, and he called it out when the Patriots got their field goal to tie it. Place just went crazy.
Yeah, that was magical. That game and the 41-0 game were just total magic. They were just total great experiences. They were amazing. They were totally amazing.
I don't know if you remember about the Colt game, because we had our season tickets, in the lower level still at that time. Whoever you always got your tickets from, he either sold them to somebody else or he didn't put the playoff invoice in. So this was back in the day of like message boards and everything. I was on some message board, and this was like a couple days before my birthday, so you weren't going to say no. I found somebody that was like scalping tickets, so we ended up like meeting them, I think, in a Sports Authority parking lot about a half hour away. I think tickets were like $250 a piece. And then as we're walking into the game, I'll never forget this, there were so many people that bought so many extra tickets, they couldn't even give them away. People were like $5, $10, $5. Like, so many people had all these extra tickets that they couldn't even give away right at the gate.
There were many times with hockey and football where I remember we wanted, and baseball, where I knew we had to be in the building, and I would get tickets. I would get tickets anyway, anyhow, through the secondary market. And back then, I didn't care what I paid. We had to be in the building. I always felt that way. Certain events had to be in the building. Incredible.
All right, well, go ahead. You got anything else?
Oh, I probably could go all night. I probably left out so much that I'll think of later on, like individual moments, just from different teams and different events.
We'll definitely do this again. Maybe we'll do another one or something at some point during training camp or before the season. But thanks for hopping on, just sharing all your insight, all your stories. I know there's a lot of stuff going on right now, and you've done an amazing job over the past, I don't know how many years, all decades of, just finding time to, like you said before, making sure we were in the building. That was always special to me.
Yeah.
You getting 3-4 hours sleep every night and still being there 8 Sundays and for all the Met games, that was always amazing to me. So thank you for all that, and thank you for hopping on tonight and talking with us.
And I would be remiss, my final point, I would be remiss if I didn't say, when I said before that, I'm blessed and it's a wonderful life and George Bailey's got nothing on me, and that I'm so blessed with all these sports teams, that I'm blessed with such a great family, with a great wife and 3 great kids and grandkids. It just, when I was talking before about sports, my family and sports, to me, it's all one big picture.
Yeah, it's what kind of bonds everybody and unites us. And mom played a huge part in that too. It'd be wrong not to even mention her. I mean, she knew more stats than me growing up. I remember her rattling off batting averages from guys, in '69. She remembered everybody's roster, their number. I'm like, this is crazy.
She knew everyone's
number. You guys were a great match.
I mean, when I first met her, that was one of the great reasons, one of the many reasons I loved about her. and she was always a real big sports nut. And I just have this I just this overwhelming great feeling about my family and my sports family. And to me, it's like been one unbelievable ride. And I only wish that feeling on anybody and everybody, whether you're 5 years old or 8 years old or a teenager or just getting started with a family. Just, if you look at every single season as a magical season and you hope for the best, and every year with your family is a magical year with your family. Birthdays, holidays, special events, sporting events. To me, it's just one amazing magical ride, and we're all privileged. It's all a privilege. And in the end, if there's a couple of championships, hey, that's awesome.
Makes it even better. Absolutely. Great message. Thank you so much for that. Hope you guys have a great night.
All right. Have a good night. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you for hopping on. Go Jets.